Hey everybody, Donnie Turner here with the Buying Tampa Bay podcast. And of course, I always have our two hosts. First of all, we have our resident rancher, our cash flow cowboy, Mr. Chase Clark, here on the call.
Hey, what's up, guys?
And then, of course, you can't forget, we have, he's a weightlifter, he's a runner, and you won't find a real estate guy who's funner, Peter Murphy.
What's going on, y'all?
I see you got the Boston gear on right now.
I do. It's my one day I get to wear it. I'm out in the elements on Hurricane Ivan Wednesday and trying to stay warm and dry.
Yeah, well, as we're recording this right now, let's see, it's 11 a.m. Wednesday, September 28th, and we're supposed to be hours away from the onset of a hurricane. I think it's rapidly approaching the coast as we speak. At least where I'm at, Carrollwood, Florida, it's not too bad, honestly. I mean, it's like just a bit of a rainy day, but still a little early. How about you guys?
Yeah, we dodged a bullet, man. I'll tell you, 2 days ago, what the eye of the storm was looking like the track was straight up Tampa Bay. That was going to be much, much worse for us up here in the greater Tampa area. But just like Hurricane Charlie back in 2004, this thing kind of made a hook to the right. It looks like Fort Myers, Punta Gorda, Northport, well to the south of us is going to get the worst of it. And for us, we're probably just going to have a lot of a rain event here. Not too much wind, but tons of rain coming our way.
Very good. And I'm up here in the northwest Hillsborough County in a town called Lutz. And again, yeah, we definitely dodged a bullet. You know, if you look at a map of the state of Florida, much of Tampa Bay almost projects out into the Gulf as though after years and years of hurricane activity, this is an area that has survived. And whatever it is, the geographic nature of the area, the strong hand of God protecting this region, this area tends to be somewhat insulated. Now, there is a story circulating that Indian mounds have protected Tampa Bay from direct hits from hurricanes for the last several hundred years. So whatever your faith seems to be, there seems to be some kind of strong.
Yeah, in fact, looks like we lost Katrina for a second, but definitely, I've got Indian mounds in my neighborhood, actually. So that may be what's going on here.
That could be.
Ancient Indian burial grounds.
Well, it's very interesting, too, because, rainfall, depending on what news you're listening to right now in Tampa Bay, you're slated to get anywhere from 6 to 20 inches of rain over the next 48 hours. And for this area, that's our biggest threat, I think, right now, because we've already received so much rain in the month of September. And I'm just real quick going to pan my camera to my other side so I can show you here in my yard, what that might look like. And this here is the drainage ditch out in front of my house. You see, I've got a pretty large culvert at my driveway there. And this amount of rain has accumulated over the past 24 hours, basically. It's about 12 inches deep. And I've got sump pumps in my yard that are pumping water out of critical areas of my yard. And these are the outflow valves of those pumps. I've got 6 pumps in my yard doing this. You can imagine there are people around here in this area that are definitely going to be flooded out by these rains.
Yeah, well, that's one of the big concerns, right? If the infrastructure could hold out with all of this wind and rain. I know a lot of people, one of the big things is electricity, right? Electricity usually goes out in these events.
Yeah, that's right. I think everyone in the Tampa Bay area is kind of bracing for possible power outages. If you're staying around and you haven't gone to a shelter, you've probably got your generator handy, or you're staying with somebody who does. You've got your batteries and your flashlights and, all the food and water that you need. Especially in rural areas out by where we are, you've got a situation where you're on well water and you've got to have electricity to power the well. So a lot of people out here by me have backup generators running on propane or diesel power generators. And, that's how we'll get by if the power goes out. Recently, power companies all over this area, especially Tampa Electric, have been trimming trees and getting them off the power lines in preparation for the storm season. And so that's been a good thing, and hopefully that will save us from too much power outage.
That is a good thing. Coming from my California context, PG&E, that's one of the big providers in California. And, they're notoriously, I think they're currently fiscally bankrupt, but they're also, just notoriously behind on maintenance, the infrastructure, the electrical grid almost pretty often goes out. And so it's good to see that the infrastructure, at least, that they're attempting to do the best they can to prevent. Some of this stuff isn't preventable, but
that's right, Donnie. In fact, one of the most interesting things about a storm like this is that no one's really educated on how to protect your property the right way. And I can't tell you how many people I've seen either on the news or driving around town that are doing more damage to their homes, drilling giant screw holes into the side of their stucco to put plywood up, and hanging things from all sorts of eaves and screwing things into their roof and causing way more damage to their home in that way than the storm probably ever would have done, because now they've got holes in their house that will lead to further rot, water intrusion, and things down the road with just normal rainstorms. And so that's a big gap, I think. I think people are doing well on the safety side, but they don't really fully understand how to appropriately protect their home. And I haven't heard too many people out there giving really good advice on that either.
Well, one of the things that we heard this morning, and I'm back from a better location, hopefully, with a better signal and less distraction, is how much our areas prepare all year round. And we've been preparing for the last, 50 years to make our area as resistant to hurricanes as possible. And so our homes have been constructed with a whole different set of hurricane construction standards since Hurricane Andrew hit over 25 years ago. And that's a huge amount of our real estate inventory. And so we have a higher construction standard. Our electrical grids and our water grids have been built and protected in a substantial way and are improved year round, so that when storms like this do strike, it's not like we just found out about storms in Florida and are just trying to do what's necessary to prevent against them. We as a community have been preparing for a long time. There are things that people used to do. Boarding up windows was something that was prolific. People used to tape their windows with duct tape and with masking tape to provide a shatterproof resistance if something were to hit. And so many of these things, it has been determined over the course of time, provide some benefit, but some of them provide almost no benefit. They're just things that people do to make themselves feel like they're doing that extra protective step. But we tend not to get tons of cyclonic activity from local gusts that would hurl projectiles through windows and cause the kind of impact resistance from plywood or taping of windows to be necessary. So these are things that folks do to make themselves feel protected, but aren't necessarily the most beneficial things to do in the event of a hurricane.
I saw a pretty great meme. When things are going on, the memes usually explode on the internet. And I saw one, and it's this house, and they had stakes on both sides of the house, and there were straps over the house, and it looked like a real photo. And then somebody on there was like, I'm providing this hurricane protection service, $50. I'll come to your house, strap down your house.
Right.
Yeah, the meme I saw with that photo said something like, "Hey, for all of you new Floridian transplants from the north, this is a good way to freak them out."
Yeah.
Ratchet strap your house to the ground.
Right.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah. You don't want to lose your house in a hurricane, like in that old movie, but
Wizard of Oz.
Oh. Yeah, the Wizard of Oz. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Well, one thing that's interesting, about all of this is I was reading this really good blog online yesterday, and it was talking about the wind force required to lift things off the ground. We were talking about people taping windows and boarding windows up, and obviously the biggest threat is a projectile. Something loose flying through the yard that's going to go right through your window, and that's what people are worried about. But even with a 100 mile per hour wind, anything that weighs over 45 pounds will not start flying through the air. So if you've got anything that weighs 45 pounds for a 100-mile-an-hour wind gust, it's not going to go anywhere. And that's a physics thing, I guess. But, so that's just something to keep in the back of your mind when you decide to do some irreversible damage to your house. And board that stuff up. And I'm not saying that's the case for everyone. If you live right on the water, if you live next to neighbors that haven't put their stuff away, yeah, protect yourself. But for the most part, just consider, the kind of wind and the kind of potential, hazard you actually have versus just doing everything out of a huge abundance of caution.
Well, there's a really important article I read this morning, which was a reminder of the last time a major storm hit the Tampa Bay area. And of course, other areas get hit and we have some impact. But in 1921, the Tarpon Springs storm hit the Tampa Bay area, and 8 people were killed during that event in 1921. It was a tragedy, of course. But, back then we had an area that had 50,000 people living in it. It was just recently populated in a lot of ways. Tourists and investors in the Northeast were propping up the Tampa Bay area as a vacation destination. And so they were really alarmed when this storm came through and it wiped out some roads and some people died from it. And of course, that's always a tragedy. But the level of devastation that brought about was largely due to the fact that a 1920s infrastructure was not super capable of handling a powerful storm and substantial rainfall. But only about 8 inches of rain fell that time. And in that 8 inches of rain washed out a lot of roads. It did some real damage. And we compare that to what happens. A 4-inch rainfall in a strong summer storm is a very common event right here, right now. Our infrastructure has had more than 100 years to develop. A major event comes through and a tree falls on a house and a life is disrupted by that for sure. But generally speaking, deaths are extremely rare in our area from major hurricane events like this. And so bringing all this into perspective is a really important thing. We can spend a whole lot of effort and a whole lot of worry in our lives trying to, prepare for the absolute worst that could happen. Of course, the absolute worst is the loss of a life, but there is decreasing frequency of that in these kinds of events outside of wanton human neglect. And that is like the kinds of things that happen in an area like Katrina or an area like Louisiana when Katrina came through. And there were some real poor decisions that happened there in the aftermath of the storm that led to some loss of life. But, that's not really where we are these days as we think through these events. We're in a far more prepared state. We're far more conscientious. And our lack of mortality during these kinds of events is a result of that deliberate planning. So kudos to all those people who have gone before us and made such great preparations to our grid and to our locales so that we survive these things in a relatively good state.
Yeah, and I guess let's not forget about the technology, man. The technology is insane these days. I mean, not only have we known this storm was coming for 8 or 9 days, right? But like all the detailed data, I mean, like the ability of these guys to look out at past weather patterns with troughs and currents and everything else and predict pretty accurately, even 48 hours out as to where this thing's going to make landfall is pretty amazing. Something they definitely didn't have back in 1921. And so really, like you said, the biggest danger during the hurricane, and I think we saw this in Katrina, is not the actual storm itself coming. It's residual things that happen that haven't been prepared for, like levees in New Orleans breaking and flooding out major neighborhoods, or, that oak tree in your yard that just gives way because of ground saturation and falls over, things like that are, really nothing that can be predicted or planned for. And so that's what we got to watch out for here.
Sure. No, it is incredible. And I think we're able to predict it so early out. I heard somebody recently say, it's another meme, another joke. It's like being stalked by a turtle because this storm is coming so slowly. Yeah, like you said, we're seeing it like a week out and we're like, oh no. And everybody's preparing. It's just, well,
Yes. It's
also
very
another
painful
thing too. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I was going to say very painful to watch. I mean, 3 days ago, it was up in Big Bend, and it was Apalachicola and Tallahassee, which were bracing for a direct impact. And then it wasn't until yesterday morning when I woke up that showed Tampa Bay was in the crosshairs.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the end of the day yesterday, Tampa Bay was almost not even within the cone of certainty anymore, or a cone of uncertainty. It was outside. And so, boy, that's whiplash for the whole state of Florida. And now you got this situation where people down in Cape Coral and Sarasota, they are scrambling because 24 hours out, really 6 or 8 hours out from landfall, they find out that they're the targets. So some of this prognostication can leave us with a false sense of security. And I don't think the people who live in Cape Coral right now are all that happy that it took them this long to find out that they were the target. So we watch all of this news and all of this data, and the people who are actually the target weren't the ones preparing, right? And so that's a tough situation. And my heart and my prayers go out with anyone who's in the Sarasota or in Cape Coral or Fort Myers area, because they did not know they were getting ready to get this.
Well, yeah, what's interesting is I always hear emergency managers for these counties come on and say, look, hey, we're in this cone, and you hear like guys on the news, Paul Delgado, these local weather guys say, hey, anywhere in the cone is fair game. But you never really think that because they've gotten so good. You kind of focus on the line, right? But, hopefully people down there in Sarasota County and Lee County, they were in the cone. They were in that broad cone 3 days ago. And their emergency managers were making preparations, and they were telling people, hey, you're not out of the woods. But, yeah, they did not expect to be the eye of the storm. So I know that when they do declare emergencies, they do get the highest risk people into shelters, which is good. And everyone else is kind of left to fend for themselves, which hopefully they've done. I have some friends down there in Fort Myers, and we've gotten word from them that, they evacuated almost the entire city of Fort Myers, and they've gone to shelters that are 40 miles inland, just on the other side of Lehigh Acres. So that was at least the plan that the government gave them, down there, being that they're going to be right on the, I guess it'd be the eastern wall of the eye.
We'll be praying for them for sure.
Yeah, amen. One of my favorite ways to track the severity of a storm is affectionately called the Waffle House Index, right? And I don't know, I get a kick out of it because it's so southern. Like I never heard of that before living in California. I didn't even know what a Waffle House was. But it's just they have green, yellow, red being a Waffle House closing, which is pretty much unheard of, right, in the South. And then yellow being that they have a reduced menu supply. Like it's pretty bad. So like they only have like eggs and bacon, no waffles. And then green, being full service. And I just saw this. So this is just, okay, this got reported 2 minutes ago. I'm seeing that 21 Waffle Houses between Bradenton and Naples have shut their doors. So they're on Waffle House Index red right now in that area. So
I learn something new every day. I did not know that existed.
Really?
Either. That's good to know. I'll watch.
They're probably only closed because they evacuated.
They might not be there to work. Yeah. Well, I am curious, and like we're three very different people. We live in three very different regions. Talk to us about what each of us have done to prepare for the storm, and maybe what we've advised our tenants to do to prepare for the storm, and then we should take it to the next level, our owners, right? So what are we doing specifically ourselves to prepare for storms like this, and what have we done in the past maybe?
Yeah, sure. I'll kick it off. I think the most important thing is just know your property. I know my property, obviously, because I've lived here for 10 years. So I know what the vulnerabilities are. But a lot of tenants haven't lived in a property for more than a year and may not know. So I know we've been trying to get the word out to them about what we know about those properties that we manage. But out here, my property in eastern Hillsborough County, I'm probably going to be the closest of the three of us to, where the storm's going to track. Looks like it's going to come across southern Polk County. But the biggest issue for us is that, we have a hard pan out here, which means we have a clay base of soil. And so water doesn't perk too well. And so water tends to stand on the surface for long periods of time, which can, creep up, toward your garage, into your home and things like that. And so 6 years ago, when we found this to be the case, right before Irma, actually, we started installing, sump pump systems throughout our property to filter water out to the street. And boy, has it paid off. I should give you a little clip of that, here at the beginning of the pod, and the power of those pumps and how much water they're pumping. But in addition to that, we've got a small farm. So prepping animals has been a fun thing over the last 48 hours, making sure they've got a shelter that's high and dry to go to, making sure they've got feed and hay and things like that, and doing checks routinely throughout the storm to make sure trees haven't fallen on, barbed wire fences, and animals haven't escaped from where they're supposed to be. So that's what we have going on out here, other than the normal stuff like generators and batteries and water and, things like that.
Yeah. So, out of curiosity, so how is it out there on the ranch? Are the cattle restless at all? Have they been giving you a little bit of a fight, or?
No, man, for the most part, cows love this weather. It's
Really?
nice and cool. There's a little breeze right now. It's wet outside. They don't mind getting wet. The grass is going to grow tremendously fast over the next few days. They're fine. Then you've got animals like ducks. Ducks love this. This is like weather made for a duck, right? And then you've got goats that hate it. Goats hate walking in water. And you got to be careful with any hoofed kind of animal that they don't get hoof rot if they don't have a high and dry place to go to dry out their hooves. So we've got sheep and we've got goats that don't like to get wet, and got to keep them somewhere high and dry.
Sure. That's pretty interesting. Well, and I could go on and speak for myself. So I live on a second story, it's a low rise apartment complex. If you can see in the back, there's actually a lake back there. So I'm kind of curious where the water level is going to end up. But, I guess one thing about being a tenant, about being a renter, I guess the damage to the property, Lord willing, it doesn't happen, but it's more or less not really my problem. And, not being on the first floor does decrease the potential of there being any flooding. So that is pretty good on my part. We've done our own preparations, such as, buying water, charging our devices in the event of the electricity going out. But really, that's as much as we can do. How about you, Peter?
Yeah, so here I live on, I do live on water. So there's, this is my first year living here through a hurricane. I moved in about 12 months ago. So I'm interested to see what wind shears will come off lake. There's always a stiff breeze out here. Well, it's wonderful in the heat of the summer, but I think wind will get up to speed a little bit more. So I've emptied off our dock, and I've pulled our jet ski out of the water, and I've taken our tubes and our ropes and our rods all in, put all that stuff that's very light and that can be a projectile. I put all that into sheds. I have orchards, and I have, we fertilized those a few days ago so they would capitalize on the rainfall. Nothing much we can do there, but we have a continual work cycle that we do to keep trees clear all around our property line and to stay on top of branches that look dead. And that had not stopped in the run up to this. Kind of like we said earlier, we prepare year round for storm events. I did have a couple palm trees that had fronds that were hanging over onto my roof. So I did cut those off because, heavily, even a light palm frond whacking up against your roof in a high wind can mess up the shingles or knock loose a concrete tile, which are what I have on my roof. So I trimmed all those off and took those away. And so my property is as secure as I can make it. It drains well. I'm not overly concerned about that. I don't board windows, even though I have 10-foot windows around the majority of my property. I just remove debris that looks like it could be a projectile in the event of some kind of cyclonic activity. For my interior of my house, I make sure that I have containers of water. Like I've got a couple of 8-gallon containers of water. I'm also on a well. So if my electricity goes out, that I have no water. but we stock up on a lot of water and we freeze a lot of ice and we fill up our pantry with canned foods in case we have a few days without electricity. I also have all my propane and my grills filled up, and I topped off my propane in my fireplace, and I have firewood so I can cook food in the event of some kind of a major outage. And I'm ready for anything like that. I have all of my backup battery packs for my cars all fully charged, and my so that I can last for a couple of extra days with phone charge if I need it. So these are things that we kind of do customarily, but we just make sure they're topped off before a storm comes into town. So personally, that's what I do. And then we have some owners and some tenants that we advise in a certain way. But I'll take a break before I go into all of that, because without a doubt, that's what a lot of our owners are concerned about right now. So Chase and Donnie, what have you gotten? Have you gotten a lot of owners calling you over the last few days expressing, what are you going to do for my property, or what should I do? I'm a tenant, and what am I going to do? And have you received any concern like that? I know I have.
Yeah, sure. I've had several tenants reach out to me that are in the Temple Terrace area, which is an area, obviously it's well inland from any kind of potential storm surge we thought we might get a couple days ago, and asking me about sandbags and things like that. And again, I think all of this goes back to knowing your properties. Know which properties are vulnerable for different things. Know which ones are surrounded by water oaks. Water oaks are the trees that fill up with water, and they have a tendency to fall because their root systems aren't as strong as grandfather oaks. So when you have high ground saturation, those are the trees that tend to topple over. And so being aware if you've got trees like that with dead wood on them, or trees in close proximity to your property, being aware of low-lying properties that might need sandbags at the doors. I had several tenants contact me about, should we sandbag? And in those cases, I was able to tell them that, hey, look, you're high and dry. You should be good. If you feel like you want to get some sandbags, do it. But I don't think it's absolutely necessary in your case, because I know your property. And I think that's the key. You've got to know the vulnerabilities of the properties. And tenants were asking me a lot of questions about renter's insurance and what's covered under that and things like that. And, I couldn't answer a lot of those detailed questions because I don't know what policy they have and I don't know the coverages. But tenants do need to know that their contents are not protected if there is a flood or any kind of catastrophic event unless they have renter's insurance. And so I've been preaching that message, even though it's too late to get it now. Tenants should have it.
We'll be back after a quick break.
You hear a lot about supply chains these days, because if the past couple years have taught us anything, it's that an efficient, well-managed supply chain is absolutely critical to keeping businesses successful and consumers happy. I'm Will Haywood, and I host a podcast called All Business, No Boundaries, where we talk about supply chains, how they work, what happens when they don't, and the innovations that are redefining what's possible in the world of logistics. Listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
No, that's one of the things about insurance. From my own personal experience, I've had little to none, but I think most of my tenants and most of my owners are, native Floridians, so they've been here all their lives. So I guess, I had a friend of mine that is a Floridian, and he's like, you can tell if you're not talking to a Floridian if they can't remember in 2004 when we got hit by 3 consecutive hurricanes. And I was like, what? I didn't even know that ever even happened. I didn't even know that's possible. I mean, I come from California where we have the exact opposite problem. I mean, our forests literally catch on fire because we have no water. So to be in a state where there's too much water, it's interesting.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, that was a crazy year. And we would watch the tropics and we would see one storm after another barreling across the Atlantic. And it was like, here goes again. And they crisscrossed across the state of Florida, and they did some damage and made a lot of folks nervous. And I was just out of college and we had hurricane parties like every weekend, Everyone looks back. if you didn't go through some kind of a major life upset during these times, you look back with a little bit of nostalgia. These are fun times with your family. All my family's inside watching movies right now, kind of hunkered down. It's like COVID quarantine all over again, and there's something kind of nice about it. But our owners, I tell you, I had several owners, and they just want to know that we're here, and that as soon as the storm moves through, we're going to inspect the properties, and we're going to make sure tenants are reporting damages to us. We keep our tenants and our owners aware of the fact that we have crews staged or ready to go if there are damage on the other side of all this. And knowing that we take our job seriously and that we're ready, to go, and we're not constrained by driving low profile vehicles. We get out of our homes once the storm has passed and navigate through maybe slightly flooded roads. That gives everyone a sense of reassurance that their property manager is there for them in a time like this.
One thing I wanted to elaborate on there is, you need to know if your tenants are evacuating, because you want to know if that property is vacant and going to be vacant for several days potentially, and which ones are in an evacuation zone. And we did have quite a few. I think we had maybe 6 or 7 properties in evacuation zones in Pasco and Pinellas counties. And so checking in with tenants to know if they're going to be there during the storm and after the storm, I think is important, so we know which ones we may need to go check on, ones that may be a little bit higher risk than others because no one's there to monitor the situation.
And I think another thing too, for the out-of-state owners, the out-of-state investors, is to know and realize that, I think business is going to be on hold, right, this week. Like, if we're lucky, we'll be back online Friday and things can start moving again. Just to share a quick story. So my dad was telling me, because, he called me on Monday and I had to tell him, I'm like, we're trying to work with the bankers, et cetera. And I was telling him, I was like, here in Florida, business has effectively stopped. It's halted, there, and nobody's doing anything. And it's basically vacation time. And then he was like, oh yeah. He was telling me, so he used to operate in Elko, Nevada. And over there, it's very much country, and they would have elk season. So the elks would be moving through. And it's like a very similar phenomenon. Like, everybody's getting out of town or everybody's hunkering down because massive amounts of elks are going to descend upon the city and then move on. So, that's another word to out-of-state investors too. I think a lot of people, they hear this stuff on the news and the phenomenon, and they get a little bit scared for their assets or for future acquisitions in this state. But if you ask me personally, my opinion is that, there is no place that's free from disaster, right?
Right, Donnie. I think, I lived in the Northeast, and every winter you're super wary of nor'easters, right? And nor'easters sweep through and leave you minimal warning while they dump all kinds of ice and snow. And when they do, they crush the power grids. Power lines are falling from the sky. Your property gets tree limbs, which are to be laden with ice, falling all over it, damaging roofs. Your heat goes out. You're freezing when that happens. This lasts for days. Nor'easters bring widespread devastation to areas that are highly dense. And let's just go through every state and look at hurricane and look at tornadoes and look at earthquakes and look at fires and look at whatever elks. I didn't even know there was an elk season. That sounds like a plague, biblical proportions. Every area has it, right? And so has always been remarkable to me that Florida gets such a bad rap for its hurricanes. We can see these coming a week in advance and make substantial preparations to mitigate the possible damage to our properties down here. But because it's like getting stalked by a tortoise, you're just afraid the whole time. That's not good for the human psyche, but it certainly is good for how we come out of these storms. And my sense is not all that much worse than any other area as they deal with their natural disasters.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting about all of that is that the role the news media plays in this. And like you said, you're stalking a tortoise. So this is like the best possible thing for a news channel on TV, right? It's like for 7 or 8 days, they get to talk incessantly about this looming threat. And everyone is glued to their TV to see where it's going and what's going to happen. And in a lot of ways, that just magnifies the situation and makes people think it's a much bigger deal than it is. Whereas, like, you get an EF5 tornado sweep through Oklahoma or Tennessee or Kentucky, and it's on the news for maybe a day after it happens. No one even knew it was coming. And then it's gone in the next news cycle, you know?
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is that, you know, if you own investment property here in Florida, even if you own it in Port Charlotte or Punta Gorda, right where this category 4 is going to slam the coast, even if you own beachfront property, if you bought it several years ago, however many years ago, and you've had it fully insured by a reputable company, if it's knocked to the ground, your deductible is going to provide you the cheapest new home you've ever bought. You know, so yeah, you'll be out of commission for a while, but if you've insured your properties correctly, you could come out better on the back end than you were on the front end, you know. So it's not all doom and gloom, you know, even if you do experience, you know, destruction or property loss. The real concern is obviously people. If you've got tenants in those properties and you yourself want to make sure that you stay safe, the properties can be fixed, the properties can be replaced, and if you've insured them correctly, you're going to be fine.
Sure. Yeah. 100%. Well, I think we've spoken a lot about a lot of different topics, but one of the things that we talk about a lot on this podcast is what property managers should do, you know, as coaching for other property managers and also for owners to know what to expect from a property manager. So, you know, in the situations like this, we spoke about it lightly, but how about we dig in a little deeper? So what does a property manager do to prep, since, you know, since we have plenty of preparation these days?
Yeah, you know, a big part of it, Donnie, is just making sure that you're doing the right thing throughout the course of the year, right? You're staying on top of the roofs that are leaking and the windows that are leaking and the trees that are overgrown. You're doing that all year so that when an unexpected event comes up, you're ready to go. I'll just assure you, if a week ago we found out about this storm, actually it wasn't a week, it was like 5 days ago. If at that point in time I needed to dispatch a vendor to repair a roof or trim a tree, I wouldn't have found one. It wouldn't have even been possible. And so our preparation happens all year round as we make sure a property is well maintained, so that by the time a natural disaster like this is impending, we're spending time reassuring tenants and owners about reminders of what to do, both to prepare themselves and their property, removing the projectiles, stocking up on batteries and water and food, but also assuring them that we're going to get through this. And as soon as we can, we'll be assessing damage, helping with insurance claims where necessary, and being responsive to requests for information. That is the best thing that we as a property manager can do at this point in time. Do our job all throughout the year and then communicate clearly when the storm actually hits and once it's passed.
Yeah, and you're going to have emergencies. I mean, like, you know, things do happen, right? So like limbs fall, properties do sustain damage from time to time. We've had a pretty good track record in this area with that. But I think our owners out there and our tenants both can rest assured that, you know, we do have the vendors ready to go. As soon as the storm passes through, as soon as we no longer have tropical storm force winds and people can get out on the roads, they can get on roofs. We've got roofers ready to tarp roofs. You know, we've got tree trimmers and, you know, all kinds of handymen ready to come in and do what needs to be done to prevent further damage to your property until the proper repair or replacement can be made. And so we do have these guys on standby. You know, they're ready to go if something does happen. We've got companies with fans. We've got water evac companies. We've got, you know, all this stuff ready to go. So we try to do what we can as soon as we hear from tenants or as soon as we know there's an issue out there to dispatch these people and minimize damage, and also show that if you do have to make an insurance claim as an owner, we have helped you take the proper steps to ensure that no further damage is done to your property, which is something required typically by the insurance companies.
Sure. Yeah. So I know we're running a little bit out of time. We've been recording for a little while now, but before we go, could we share maybe one story of some previous disaster that's blown through? I know Chase, you shared a couple of pretty amazing photos the other day of just how high the water levels have gotten in the past. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there are parts of town, and Peter and I have experienced this. I think it was back in, I don't know, 2007, 8, 9, somewhere in there, right after Katrina hit New Orleans the year after. We had a pretty good tropical storm that came through this area. And one thing that happened was the city of Tampa's pumping station for stormwater failed over behind the University Mall. And so in North Tampa, along just north of Fowler Avenue, along the 15th Street corridor, there was massive flooding because the stormwater backed up. And we happened to own a property there at the time that had, I believe it had 7 units in it, 7 or 8 units. And these duplexes saw water creeping up to the point where there were 3 feet of water inside of several of the units by the time the storm passed through. And so we had, numerous tenants that were displaced. The water was several feet deep on the property. And, of course, and true to form, news trucks started pulling up, to videotape this. And, we had gone over to the property as conscientious landlords trying to check on it, and quickly had cameras stuck in our face wondering what we were doing and all of that. But, that kind of stuff does happen. And, we had no idea that the pump station would fail and that we'd be facing something like that. But when you get 6, 8, 10 inches of rain in a 24-hour period, things like that can happen.
Sure.
Yeah, that was a tough event. And, you hate the impact on people's lives, the disruption that represents. It's never a pleasant moment. We find that it's because of a confluence of factors that those things usually happens. That kind of rain alone wouldn't have caused that problem had the system not been well maintained, and it just wasn't in that particular area. And so that stormwater drainage system failure fundamentally is what led to that problem. I mean, of course, it was needed to begin with. So you could that's a great example of poor civic planning. What are you doing building in an area that requires that kind of a pump system? But so much of our coastal areas are built like that. We require all of these things to work in tandem for us to avoid disaster. And so that was an unfortunate failure of multiple elements and systems. But I will tell you, Donnie, there are so few stories we have of catastrophic failure at properties or natural disasters that have come through that would have been more than a day or two disruption of the lives of our renters or of the income stream of our owners. I mean, we looked back and we really did some deep thinking about this. And, there's been a tree that's fallen on a few of our properties, and there have been some kitchen fires, and there have been some termite infestations and things that kind of give landlords nightmares. But they're so few and far between, and they suspend activity at properties for such a short amount of time that they're almost not even worth discussing. It's like within a day, that issue was resolved and the tenant's life was back to some semblance of normalcy. So, boy, for people who have as much experience in the businesses as we do, that's reassuring. You don't have to fear all the possible risks. You should be prepared for them. And then you should go on living your life as confidently and as risk tolerantly as possible.
Well, Murphy's Law is always in effect, but it seems like when things come, right, it exacerbates. But once again, another shameless plug. That's why you have competent professional property management to be able to resolve those issues quickly. Am I right?
That's exactly right. And gentlemen, I'm sitting out here now. It's been an hour since we started talking, and the winds have definitely picked up here. I don't know about you or you are, Chase, but I'm seeing squalls come in. My radar shows me that the eye is very close to making landfall down near Cape Coral. So, definitely prayers to God for deliverance for all those people down there, and prayers for you guys' safety too, because you never know what spawns from these things. But I look forward to reconnecting with you guys once the storm passes and hearing your good survival stories.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we're getting some wind gusts out here, maybe 15, 20 miles an hour at times, but just a steady drizzle at this point. Nothing too bad. I think they scheduled landfall sometime around 2 p.m. today, and then I think the storm is at least it was tracking to be at our parallel sometime around 6 to 8 p.m. tonight. Is what I was seeing on the last track. So I will say, having gone through Irma 5 years ago, what we're seeing now is far less rainfall at this point in the storm and far less wind. So I don't know what will come over the next, 8 or 10 hours, but this one seems to, be a little bit less devastating so far than what we saw with Irma.
Good. Well, may that last.
Yeah, but definitely prayers go out to everybody down south, and especially those people in Polk County. We talked a minute ago about 2004 when Charlie, Francis, and Gene all hit the state within about a 6 or 8 week period, and they all crisscrossed the I right through Lake Wales, which has got a lot of mobile homes in it. A lot of mobile homes in southern and central Polk County, and that's where this storm's headed. So hopefully those people are heeding the warnings and getting to safety.
Yep. I guess all we could do is hunker down and pray. So, well, thank you, Chase. Peter, thank you for your time today. I found a lot of value out of this. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will, especially those out of state that, have never experienced anything like this before. So thank you again, guys.
You're welcome. Stay safe today, guys.
Definitely.
All right. Hey, everybody. Donnie Turner here, your producer for the Buying Tampa Bay podcast. Now, we just recorded that podcast addressing, the issues with Hurricane Ian and everything else. And I thought it would be appropriate just to address the fact that, we're only talking about our direct experience. It's 11:58 p.m. Wednesday, September 28th. So we haven't actually even have received landfall yet of the storm. And we're basically just talking about our experience here in Tampa Bay specifically. Now, if you or any of your family members are in one of those dearly affected areas, we just want to say from all of the hosts here at Buying Tampa Bay that we are praying for their safety and survival. So having said that, I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and may God be with you through this storm.